Welcome to the Charlevoix Stories Project. My name is David Miles, and this is a continuation of Charlevoix oral tradition. I'm going to be talking to Betsy Reynolds today. Betsy is the former director of the Charlevoix Historical Society's Harsha House Museum, and before that she was a teacher. And now we'll get right to Betsy. Your name is Betsy Reynolds, and can you tell us where you live in Charlevoix?
I reside at 12299 Waller Road, Charlevoix. It's just like a mile out of town.
Mm-hmm. And your origin is from?
I grew up in Ellsworth and East Jordan.
You graduated from East Jordan High School?
Graduated from East Jordan High School and attended a year of college at North Central.
In?
Petoskey.
And your field was?
History.
And how did you get into education?
When my children started school, I became a room mother and worked in the library, volunteering. And then when we resided in Angola, Indiana for 12 years, and I worked in the school system there. And then when we moved back to Charlevoix, I applied for a job as a teaching assistant, Chapter 1 at Charlevoix Elementary School. And I worked there for 25 years as a teaching assistant, reading and math.
Full-time?
Full-time.
Aha. So how did you meet your husband, Doug?
At North Central, at college.
Aha.
And we married, we've been married 52 years. And that's how, we've resided in the area, most of our married life. So.
You live on a property that is called Rocky Ridge Farms, just outside the city limits of Charlevoix on Waller Road, and it has an historic heritage in its own. Can you tell us about Rocky Ridge?
Douglas's great-grandfather, Albert Reynolds, purchased the property in 1899 from James and Hannah Hawkins, and they had purchased the property from Scabos, who had originally acquired it through the Indian Land Grant, it was originally 80 acres. But by the time the Hawkinses bought it from the Scabos family, it was down to 40 acres. And then Doug's great-grandfather purchased 30 acres, and that's what we have now, and it's still in our family. And four generations have lived on Rocky Ridge Farm. And 3 generations still reside there. And we often wondered how Doug's dad couldn't quite remember how it acquired the name Rocky Ridge Farm. And there is still a very rocky ridge that runs through the width of the property. I mean, you can't hardly do anything there because it's just solid rocks. And I have an excerpt here from the Sentinel from 1909 that Willard Smith put in the paper. It says, A. Reynolds of Rocky Ridge Farm, just north of town, brings us a sample of corn cut fresh from his field that is on exhibition in this office. It will compare favorably with the samples from fields of Kansas or Nebraska.
My word.
So, he purchased the property in 1899, and it was already known as Rocky Ridge Farm in 1909. So,
well, if there is a single ridge going through the property, I wouldn't be surprised if that is what was left when the glaciers retreated and they periodically let go of the gravel that they had scooped up originally.
Yes.
And it came out and it fell and then made a ridge there. Okay, that's only my surmise. Can you mention Doug's very interesting ancestry?
Douglas is a descendant of John Alden and Priscilla Mellons of the Plymouth colony. And Experience Wheeler, the Experience Alden, the 5th great-granddaughter of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins, had a daughter. She married Andrew Wheeler, and they had a daughter, Experience Wheeler. She married a Mr. Hobart, and her daughter, Phoebe Thompson, who married Medad Thompson. She was, Phoebe Hobart and married Medad Thompson.
Who were the first permanent settlers of Charlevoix.
Yes. And their daughter, Eliza Jane Thompson married Solomon Hancock. And at this time, they were residing in Iowa, and they had moved west along with the Mormon Brigham Young. And I have excerpts where Mr. Hancock was a hunter for Brigham Young, the party that he traveled with. And so Eliza Jane married Solomon Hancock, and he died quite young. And then when Phoebe and Medad came back to Michigan with King Strang, I think they went to Wisconsin first, and then came to Michigan. But the only proof that we have that they came to Charlevoix with King Strang is in the files of this historical society. There's a letter that Phoebe received from her brother, her half-brother Erastus Rudd, scolding her in Medad for leaving the Mormon family in Iowa and Salt Lake City and coming to Michigan. I mean, he was very, very upset with her, you know.
Well, I think the story goes that they got to Beaver Island and they were so disgusted with the violence of the life over there with the early Mormons that they retreated here to the mainland in a very short period of time.
And I have a couple of excerpts from the newspaper that Willard Smith wrote, and kind of they were talking about the oldest settlers in Charlevoix. I think they came to Charlevoix in 1854.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you have that. Okay. And they came across on the ice. So
yes.
they came in the wintertime. So
right.
Okay.
Okay. Now you became involved with the Historical Society in a rather roundabout way. And I think you said it all started when you went to Gettysburg with your son Jeffrey when he was age 12, and he became immediately head over heels in love with history. So take it from there of how he ended up at the Historical Society.
Jeffrey, when we moved to Charlevoix to reside permanently after we resided in Indiana, he's always been a history buff. He just enjoyed, especially family history. He'd always ask Doug's dad stories about, living on the farm and growing up in Charlevoix. And so he was 12 years old when he became a member of the Charlevoix Historical Society. He just, one night there was a Historical Society meeting, and he just decided he was going to go, and he joined, asked if he could join, and they all kind of took him under their wing, and guided him. And later on, after he graduated from high school, he attended 2 years at Petoskey, got his associate's degree, and then he was accepted at Gettysburg. And the Historical Society issued their first scholarship to Jeffrey. And then when he graduated, when he came back from Gettysburg, they hired him as the first director of the museum.
How long was he in Gettysburg?
A year.
Really?
While he was there, he decided he wanted to become a teacher. He had a couple of wonderful professors, and he had a work study job working in the library, and one of the first things he accessioned was a first edition Dickens that had been donated to the college. And he called me from Gettysburg the night he did this, and he said, "Mom," he said, "you will not believe what I have in my hands." He said, "I'm holding a first edition Dickens." And I think he was hooked from there on. I think he kind of decided that, he was going to become a teacher, but, somewhere along the line he was going to, want to work in the museums and, and work with artifacts. So he came back from Gettysburg and went to Central Michigan and got his teaching degree, and got a teaching job at Wayne Falls, and then worked as a director during the summer in part-time in the winter months while he was here.
In Charlevoix?
In Charlevoix, at the museum. And his wife got a promotion, and they had to move back to southern Michigan. So Jeffrey decided to get his go to Wayne State University and get his master's degree in library science in archival management.
Okay.
So
he left Charlevoix, and that left the position open at the Historical Society, the Harsha House, and he asked you, maybe suggested that you would be interested in filling it?
I was the treasurer at the time, and working at the elementary school, I had learned some computer skills, and also I'd help Jeffrey time to time, at the museum. I'd volunteer, and so kind of had a general knowledge of, what was going on and what had to be done. So Jeffrey recommended to the board that I, fill in as director, and so I accepted and kind of jumped in with both feet, and had lots of long distance telephone calls to Southern Michigan to Jeffrey, and the patience of the board, I took over.
Okay. Well, I remember you had been up there approximately 4 years, but the problem was you could be there in the summer, but your job as a teacher in the winter didn't allow you to put in the amount of time that was needed. You were there, I think, Thursday evening and Saturday afternoon, and that was all you could spare. So the workload was becoming backed up, but there was nothing you could do about it because you couldn't handle it. My time was freed up in 1997. So that's when the board asked me to fill in my late mother's position on the board. And I had some free time during the week on my days off, so it was suggested then that you start training me of how to do really very basic work. So that's how the two of us got together. And then I think it was around 2002, 2003, you decided that you wanted to cut back, and that's how I took the directorship over from you. I think that's right. Okay. One thing that I have noticed from working with you is that you have an almost preternatural ability to do research and ferret out nuggets of information that probably a lot of people would overlook. So how did you get started on research, and how are you able to find all of the things that you do?
I started basically with the family history, which I kind of learned under the tutelage of Peg Embry, Virginia Embry. She was a volunteer during the summer months when she resided here. She lived in California in the wintertime, but she would come to Charlevoix. And she was a Charlevoix-born person, and she and her husband. But Peg had a very great interest in the use of the census in doing family history. And she purchased all of the census microfilm for the museum. And so in the summertime when she was volunteering, a lot of times she would read, if someone needed some family history done, Peg would read the census microfilm to use that part of it. And then, periodically she was doing some of her own family history, and we just kind of talked back and forth on all of the things that she had been through and ways to ferret out information. And she had been to Salt Lake City many, many times doing family history research. And then I started on my own, and you start with what you already know, and thank heavens for the internet. That the use of all of the websites, saves you many, many thousands of miles in traveling. But a lot of times, if you can travel, like especially visiting the local historical societies and cemeteries, you can find information that you went through just reading books or maybe even talking to people. And newspaper microfilm is invaluable, for reading obituaries. And a lot of times in the older newspapers, the newspaper had correspondence from the townships, and there would be just the news of what was going on in the local area in a lot of time. And I found a lot of history information pertaining to my grandparents in Gaylord, in Elmira, through the newspaper microfilm.
The local newspaper?
The local newspaper. The things that I never knew about, things that my dad never talked about. And I have been known to leave my name and address in an introduction, encased in poly sleeve at a cemetery. If someone has been left flowers at a gravesite, I know that some local person has been tending that grave. I've been known to leave a pot of flowers with my name and address and what I want in a pot of flowers. And two different times I've, gotten telephone calls and people were just so thrilled that, I was doing the family history and I was able to share what I had. And I've came in contact with my maternal great grandfather, Daniel Reynolds from Leelanau County. He had a sister that settled in Ludington, and I was having a hard time gleaning information from that, from that side of the family. And I did some research and traveled to Ludington and went to the library and read microfilm and ran across this name Marshall Mattis, who would be the same generation I am, but from my great-grandfather's sister, Lydia. So, and I've made contact with him, and we're friends today. We see each other quite often.
Well, other than the absolute dogged persistence that it takes to do this research, have you developed almost a sixth sense of whether you're on the right track, if you know that you're going to do it, if you sense that you're going to hit gold?
Yeah, I just, I don't give up. I just try to, use anything that's available. I had an instance when I was researching my husband's family. My husband's great-grandfather, Jesse Reynolds, they resided in Broome County, New York. And I was stumped. For 4 years, I tried to find out who his parents were. And nothing, I just a complete wall. So I went through the records I already had, and Albert and Ellen Reynolds, Doug's great-grandparents, had a daughter that died, and she was buried in a Brown family cemetery in Broome County. And I thought, what is she doing buried in a Brown family cemetery? So I went back to the census and looked for a Brown family that was residing in the area. And there was a David and Lydia Brown. And in the 1850 census, residing in the same property in the farmstead was Jeremiah and Elizabeth Reynolds. And Lydia was their daughter.
Ah.
So in the 1860 census, Jeremiah isn't living there, but Elizabeth is still residing in the home, and Lydia is listed as the daughter. A librarian from Broome County I called her and asked if they had any information on the Reynolds family there, and she suggested that I use the 1865 New York State Census. And that census gives you the information where they resided, where they were born, and that was where I found Jeremiah's father, David Reynolds, who lived in Columbia County, east of Broome County. And from there, I found that a book had been written on this Reynolds family, from England to David Reynolds residing in Columbia County. So, my research was finished when I purchased the book. And
well, it's like getting onto a spider web. Then you can go in this direction, then you can go in that direction, and then up and over and around.
Yeah, you just have to look at what you have in front of you, and the simple fact that the daughter was buried in this Brown family cemetery, it opened up a whole door for me. I mean, another door for me that I would not have. I would probably, I don't know if I would still have about the other information.
Well, then your research into the family business then set you up for the research that we had to do when we started doing our publications. And we started, I think, in 2006, 2007. We formed the Charlevoix Historical Society Press. And you and I and the late lamented Karen Lewis, whom we lost in January of 2016, and Steve Gosley, the director who replaced you when you retired, the four of us have produced 6 books, believe it or not. And I do not have one of them, but we started out with the Piers of Charlevoix and the channels and the lighthouses. And then we did the channel bridges, we did the hotels, we did the railroad, which is not here. We did the historic shorelines of Charlevoix. And this is our latest that came out in 2015 on the historic vessels of Charlevoix. And to give the viewer of this DVD an idea of how you do research, this pile of documents right here, which is all in your typewriting, this constitutes 25% of the research that went into this book alone. Which, whenever I look at the box that it contains, is mind-boggling, what you have done.
Well,
so I know from experience, and I know you've done this too, that getting into the microfilms of the local newspapers is worse than being addicted to opium. Because you get on these news sheets and you go looking for something and something else catches your eye. And above that is something else, and over here is something else. Pretty soon, you're reading the whole paper, and you've got 51 more editions to go through for that year. And it becomes absolutely addictive.
Very much so.
And myself doing research like this, sometimes you have to take a hint of something that will tell you maybe where you can go to in the hours and hours and hours. But when you find it, it's like you have struck gold in the Klondike. And from then on, the vein of information just flows.
Remember when we were trying to find the time of year that the 3 vessels were stuck in the ice up in the channel, outside the channel?
2 vessels that got stuck by the bridge, yeah. The only clue we had that it was after Labor Day. So I had to go back through every single year from 1920 back to 1900 to find out in the early part of September when it happened. And I finally found it in 1904. And that's what the research takes. Now, you have also done a lot of research on the Civil War veterans of Charlevoix County. Could you tell us about how you got started on that and your cooperation with the city?
That started the bicentennial of the Civil War. And Steve Gosley wanted to do a program regarding the Civil War veterans of Charlevoix. And so Karen was helping him. Karen Lewis was helping with that. And she started photographing the grave sites. We didn't have a lot of information on the veterans. And so she started photographing their headstones at the cemetery. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon the city gave us the office at the chapel at the cemetery.
At Brookside Cemetery.
And for 2 summers, we worked out of the chapel, photographing all of the headstones and documenting where they're buried. There are some mistakes, that's in stating where they're buried. Some of the records say that they're buried there, but they're not. We found 2 that are buried out of state. So we've documented that kind of stuff. And my being addicted to doing family history, I started recording the family history of every veteran that we had.
Do you have any approximately off the top of your head how many you found?
I think we have close to 112
With
veterans.
research done on all of them.
Yes, we have the complete family history of all of those veterans, and we tried to photograph all of their headstones, and so that led to 2 years of traveling from all over northern Michigan. I think Karen Lewis, Kate Smith, and Kate left, and myself, we have visited every cemetery in Charlevoix and Antrim County, photographing, looking for the headstones and photographing them.
I know some of the stories are pretty funny about how you even had to get into them.
One fall, the two Kates went south for the winter. This was in November, and it was a beautiful balmy day. And so Karen and I set out, and I was driving, and we had to go out in the boondocks around Boyne Falls, and I had Googled instructions to this cemetery, and it led me down this 2-track up and down the hills, and I ended up at the bottom of a hill in some deep sand, and I thought, we've got to get out of here. I put my car in low drive, and thank heavens it was at the bottom of the hill. We got out of there. It was just, my heart was just pumping, and here I'm using crutches to get around, and Kieran's, walking with a cane, and I thought, what are we going to do if we get stuck here? So we got back out of there and found another way to the cemetery. We get to the cemetery, and it's a family farm, and it's fenced in, and there are cattle and horses, it's around in the pasture, and Karen is scared to death of horses, and the gate is locked, and there's this skinny, just this portion of the fence that is open. And so Karen, being the smallest she is, was the only person going to get through. So she squeezed through. I gave her my camera, and she, walking with a cane on uneven ground in tall grass, and she found the headstone and took the picture, and we had good laughs over that one.
Well, after all these years, are these headstones even legible somehow?
No, and sometimes I take a brush and rub the moss off, and sometimes you take a piece of paper and a pencil and do a rubbing to see if you can help you get what's transcribed there. So, but it's amazing.
The research was turned into the Historical Society about 2 months ago, and it fills 3 boxes that sit like this. Mm-hmm. I think it's almost 2.5 stories tall. 2.5 feet tall, and filled from one end of the box to the other. And that's the amount of research that you have done.
In doing the research, we found that we have 10 veterans that don't have headstones. So I've applied to the national records there, the National Archives. I had to supply all of their discharge papers and that military information, and I'm still waiting. We have to get legal paperwork from Washington before I can apply to get a headstone, a military headstone for them.
Do you work through the local veterans office for that?
They help me, and then once I get the discharge papers, the legal discharge papers, I have to go through the funeral home, and they will order the headstones for us.
Have any idea how long the process takes?
I'm waited 2 years. I still haven't heard anything, but there's such a backlog because so many historical societies and history groups were doing the same thing as Karen and I were documenting and trying to get headstones replaced, and it's just a waiting period.
Okay. Let's get back to Rocky Ridge Farm. You've got some documents and a photo here?
Yes, I have an abstract of the property showing where Scalbos
look at that.
Acquired the land through the Indian land grant.
This is when it had to be fed into a typewriter, and I don't think I see one single mistake.
And also, you'll notice that when I first saw this, and I was working at the Historical Society, that Horace Harsha and Daisy Harsha were mortgagers for the property through Angeline McSabe and her husband.
The people who owned the Harsha House, where
Yes.
the Historical Society is. This is amazing. Because look at the size of the typewriter they would have to have used. The carriage is about twice as wide
Yep.
as normal. There isn't one error in this. Back in the 1920s,
And this kind of legal document is also very beneficial in doing family history. My great-grandfather from Leelanau County, his headstone said that he was buried in 1902, and I was doing some research in the land records in Leelanau County, and I found out that he was still alive in 1904. He and my grandmother sold some of the property, and he was present at this exchange. So,
and here's the sections where there's all this, what I call legalese, and it's perfect. It could be printed and used without any editing. Township 34 North, Range 8 West, commas, semicolons. It's amazing. The picture?
and this is a photograph of Albert, and I'm not sure who took it. This Albert and Allen living at the log house, and we're assuming that the Scalbos family probably built the log house.
That is a typical structure for this area. It had a little porch in the front with two windows on each side and the shed in the back. We have a picture of a similar house down on Marion Center Road toward Ellsworth, and it said on the back of the photo that they had to beware of bears getting into the storage area in the back. But that is certainly typical of northern Michigan.
And we also have the bill of sale for the Model T there in the photograph.
So what year
Is that a Model T or Model A?
What year is it?
I'm not sure. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember the year. It's one of the
Somebody who knows cars better
the
than
Brown
me.
Cars sales agency in Charlevoix. He did an advertising of how many cars that he had sold this one year, and he listed all of the patrons who had bought these cars. So there was that proof too that Albert had purchased this vehicle.
And the other documents you have here?
And this is one of the first publications that the Charlevoix Historical
That I think is the first publication they did.
There was the original Bob Miles book that the Historical Society printed to raise money to put the edition on
In 75, 76, yeah.
But this was the next one. This is a walking tour.
And this was done during your directorship.
Yes.
Did you write any of it?
Yes, I did the chapter on Mount McSabe. And I just gleaned the information using the files at the Harsha House. It was one of my first
Research projects?
research, and my son Jeffrey was the director at the time. But
So this is your work here at Mount McSabe.
yeah,
And then we brought out, I think it was at your suggestion, that we simply copy the format for this. So this is the town, and this is, believe it or not, our 11 shorelines. You think of a town on the water and it has a shoreline. Charlevoix has 11 of them, and each one of them has its own distinctive characteristics and history. You could write a history about each one of those 11 shorelines.
yeah.
And this one took us, if I remember, quite a long time because we kept finding information and finding. And we finally had to look at each other and say, stop. we just can't keep doing
Well,
this.
that's the trouble with reading the newspaper microfilm.
You just keep finding and finding.
And Willard Smith was, he's probably the, Charlevoix's, to me, he's a hero, because so much, we would not have as much of Charlevoix history if it wasn't for Willard. And he was a champion for, Charlevoix, the growth of Charlevoix, and promoting its growth and
He
people
was the
coming here.
editor of the first Charlevoix newspaper. He
Yes.
came here in 1869. Well, most of the information you have on these sheets are from the Sentinel.
Yes, and then later the Courier.
And if I remember right, Willard, excuse me, Willard listed every single major large boat that came in and out of the harbor by day, and he would publish this weekly. And that's why we have such an extensive record of the maritime traffic that came in and out of Charlevoix.
Well, he was the customs officer for many years. The Sentinel office was on the waterfront.
And that was one of his duties.
And the captains would come into the office, and then, he would write in a weekly, excerpts would be, pertaining to the vessels that came and what they carried and
how much it weighed.
Captains.
And that is why we were able, you found this, another one of those instances of you're looking at the paper, and there it is, a little paragraph. In 1897, you said, look at this. And it said that there was more maritime tonnage passing through the waters of Charlevoix that year than any other port on the east side of Lake Michigan outside of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I have told that to many people. I said, it's hard to realize, as small as we are, how important Charlevoix was. Where did all of this maritime tonnage come from? Well, up until 1894, we had 3 iron smelters. In 1897, the one in Ironton had been defunct for 3 years. So you're bringing in iron ore, you're taking out iron ingots. The lumber, the fishing, the ice, and above and beyond that, you had the passenger liners coming in here from April until December. And all of that adds up. And I don't think there's any other port on the east side of Lake Michigan that had the variety of the boats and the traffic that we did.
And Charlevoix was a port where there was a lot of boat building going on. And a lot of the vessel owners and captains would bring their boats to Charlevoix during the wintertime to be refurbished and repairs made. And so we had, quite an industry for boat building and boat repairing.
As we found out when we did this book.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we have I don't remember how many boats, but there's over 100 vessels were built in Charlevoix by James, Bouvet and Hamilton's and, a lot of the other boat builders. And I have that all documented, and every boat that was built in Charlevoix.
Well, you mentioned Bouvet, and he was born in 1854 of French-Canadian stock. And he was so renowned on the Great Lakes that in 1892, he was notified that he had been invited to show his work at the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition, the Great White City, in 1893.
Yeah.
That's how well known he was. And that's another fact that you just happened to come upon.
Yep. Through the newspaper.
Well, so do you have anything you want to add?
If you're doing your family history, talk to your family members, and in doing your family history, you're also saving stories for the future generations. But nowadays, medically, it's good to know, what happened to your family, how members, the illnesses that they had or what they died of. That helps. And also family dynamics. There's so many things that happen in families you don't always understand. But if you look back and do your family history, you'll find out, things that happened, people died, or, disagreements and, families separated, and it all affects family members, and you'll find out, why your family did this or why they did that, and it's just good to know and helps you to understand. I have my father's mother was left the family, and there was a lot of bad feelings, and I knew very little of her family history because my dad had just no regard for his mother whatsoever. But doing the family history, and she married my grandfather. She was very young. There was a 15-year age disparity between them, and she birthed 12 children. And I thought, after doing the family history, I had a different understanding of her, and a little bit of empathy for what she went through. It was hard being a young woman at that time, married to an older man, and having that many children, being stuck on the farm, and her mother, I found, ended up, she was in the Traverse City State Hospital. After the youngest son was born, was postpartum depression, and she never came out of the hospital. So my grandmother lived with that. So it's, you just, trying to understand why people do the things they do, and understand your family, and have some, and I've brought a lot of my family members back together, and my aunts and uncles, and
good.
It's been,
well, you've done an
blessing.
enormous amount of work, Betsy, in laying the basis for the knowledge that we have of Charlevoix. I know I cannot thank you enough for how you taught me and what you showed me and how to do it. And, working together with you was just a pure joy for all 6 of these books. So with all of the research that you have done and what you have discovered about Charlevoix's history, is there any one era in the town's history that you would like to go back and relive? Myself, it's the age of the schooners. I would love to watch them just coming in and going out because they were so majestic. What about you?
I think probably the World War I era. I guess I was reading the newspaper. It was amazing how it brought the town together. How the different activities that the town did to help each other. There was meatless. I think there was meatless Wednesdays, and I found excerpts in the paper about where there was a sugar rationing. And there was a notice in the paper that restaurants were encouraged not to put sugar bowls on the counters or on the tables, because if it was there, the people would use it. And so there was, I guess pulling together and,
A real community spirit.
Yeah.
I know that when the announcement came that the war was at an end, the whole town just exploded. It's like they were dancing in the streets. Schools let out, businesses closed. They were just one big, massive day of celebration.
And I also found out in reading the Sentinel and the Courier, at the end of each war, World War I and World War II, there was kind of an explosion of growth in Charlevoix. Our men would, served overseas, and they would meet boys from other areas of the country, and a lot of them after the war took their pension or their I don't know, what do you call it, the money that they're given to when they're released from their service, but settled and brought, started businesses in Charlevoix. I think through meeting guys from Charlevoix that they served with. It sounded like an interesting area, but there really was a lot of growth in Charlevoix after each war. So.
Yeah, I know that was especially true because I remember it when I was a boy. The amount of people that came here after the war Gordon Friedman came up from Cincinnati to start Friedman Artcraft. Quanstrom built DME or AME, American Mold Engineering here, mainly because they loved Charlevoix so much. Gordon knew it from his boyhood. Mr. Quanstrom discovered it and fell head over heels in love with it and brought that plant up, which was a godsend to the local economy because both of them employed so many people. So Charlevoix just had that, what you would say, knack, quality that attracted people to come here, which it always has, but especially after World War II, when the small industries started up here.
They were kind of, thinking about the people that you're born and raised in Charlevoix. Several years ago, when there was a controversy over the bridge, the summer residents and people were so upset that long lines of when the bridge is open, and how do people stand it? They couldn't stand the inconvenience, and some Charlevoixan wrote into the paper saying that you could take the person out of Charlevoix, but you can't take Charlevoix out of the person that lived here. And I truly believe that. I grew up in another town, in northern Michigan, but I don't have the reverence for my home community, my birthplace, that I know people from Charlevoix who grew up here, born and raised here, have.
There have been several instances of people going away to make their careers elsewhere, not being able to wait until they retired so they could come back.
Yeah.
It has that kind of a hold on people. And I know for myself, when I worked at the Lodge Motel, I was checking out a woman one morning, and she said they were on their way, it was on a Monday morning, they were on their way to sign on their house. And I said to her, how did you end up in Charlevoix? Do you have connections here, family, friends? She said, no, we were driving through and we were stopped by the bridge. And I just looked out at Round Lake and I turned to my husband and I said, this is it. Just instantaneously like that.
Yeah.
It's an amazing town.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Betsy. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
And I love Charlevoix's history.
Very apparent.